The shotgun blast echoed through the valley, sending a flock of startled birds scattering into the dusty Montana sky as Eliza Whitaker threw herself over the small child beside her. The year was 1876, and life in the frontier town of Redemption Creek had never been particularly easy for a woman alone, but today had taken a decidedly dangerous turn. "Get them brats and yourself off my property," shouted Bernard Thatcher, the red-faced banker who owned half the businesses in town, including the abandoned church Eliza had been using as shelter for the past 3 nights. He pumped his shotgun menacingly, ejecting a smoking shell. "I told you yesterday, this ain't no orphanage." Eliza raised her chin defiantly, her dark honey-colored hair falling loose from its pins as she kept her body between the gun and the 4 children huddled behind her. At 26, she'd learned how to stand her ground, even when her knees threatened to buckle. "We'll be gone by sundown, mister." "Thatcher," she said, her voice steadier than her racing heart, "the children just need to gather their things." "You got till I count to 10, Thatcher growled, aiming the shotgun at the sky. "Then I start shooting closer." 10-year-old Thomas clutched at Eliza's skirts while she quickly gathered little Sarah, barely 5, into her arms. The twins, Mary and Matthew, both 8, were already backing away, their eyes wide with fear. 1, 2, Thatcher began counting, his face twisted with disgust. Eliza herded the children toward their meager belongings, a few blankets, a pot, and the small bundles containing each child's treasured possessions. She'd been caring for them since the influenza took their parents 6 months ago. The town had tolerated her unconventional arrangement at first, when she'd kept them in the back room of the millinery shop where she worked. But when Mrs. Hargrove fired her 3 weeks ago, claiming customers didn't want to shop where those orphans might be lurking, everything had fallen apart. 7, 8, run, Eliza whispered urgently, pushing the children ahead of her. They scrambled down the hill behind the church, Thomas struggling with the heavy pot while Eliza carried Sarah and the twins managed the blankets. Thatcher's final counts and a 3rd shotgun blast followed them down the slope, but Eliza didn't look back. There was no point. She'd tried every home in Redemption Creek. No one would take them, and not all of them together anyway. The Wilsons had offered to take Mary as a kitchen helper, and the blacksmith had suggested Thomas could learn the trade, but Eliza had promised their dying mother they would stay together. It was a promise that had cost Eliza everything: her job, her room at the boarding house, and her standing in the community. Now labeled a troublemaker with strange notions about family, she'd become an outcast in the town she'd called home for 5 years. "Miss Eliza, where are we going?" Matthew asked, his small face brave despite the tears tracking through the dust on his cheeks. Eliza set Sarah down and knelt before the children, gathering them close. "We're going to follow the creek north," she said with more confidence than she felt. "There's homesteads up that way. Maybe someone will have work for me and a place we can stay." "What if nobody wants us?" Mary whispered, the question they all feared. Eliza forced a smile. "Then we'll build our own place. We're a family now, and families stick together." The children nodded solemnly, trusting her completely, which only increased the pressure crushing her chest. They had enough food for maybe 2 days, and the nights were getting colder. She had $12.37 sewn into the hem of her dress, all that remained of her savings. As they followed the creek northward, Eliza's mind raced with possibilities, each seeming more desperate than the last. She could try for the mining camp 15 miles to the east, but she'd heard stories about those places that made her blood run cold. The army fort to the west might have worked for a laundress, but would they allow 4 children by sunset? They'd traveled nearly 5 miles, and the younger children were stumbling with exhaustion. Eliza spotted a small clearing near the water's edge, sheltered by cottonwood trees. "We'll camp here tonight," she announced, trying to sound as though sleeping outdoors had been her plan all along. "Thomas, can you help gather some firewood? Mary and Matthew, let's see if we can find some stones to make a fire ring." As the children scattered to their tasks, Eliza bounced Sarah on her hip, the little girl's head heavy against her shoulder. "It's going to be an adventure," she whispered, as much to herself as to the child, just like in the stories. The fire was small but warm, and Eliza had managed to catch 2 fish from the creek, cooking them in the battered pot. The children ate hungrily, and for a moment, huddled around the fire with full bellies, they almost seemed content. Eliza was arranging the blankets for sleep when she heard the distant thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. "Quick," she whispered, into the trees. They had barely concealed themselves when a rider appeared, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He reined his horse to a halt at their abandoned campfire, his tall frame easy in the saddle. "Hello, the camp," he called out, his voice deep and cautious. "I mean no harm, just saw your fire from the ridge." Eliza hesitated, one arm around Sarah and the other gripping the small knife she used for cleaning fish. The man dismounted, and in the firelight, she could see he wore a wide-brimmed hat and a dusty duster coat. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a holstered revolver at his hip. "I know you're there," he said more softly, "and you've got reason to be careful, but the night's getting cold and it looks like you've got young ones. I've got a ranch about 3 miles north. You'd be welcome to shelter there instead of sleeping rough." Thomas tugged at Eliza's sleeve. "Miss Eliza, I'm scared," he whispered. The stranger must have heard because he backed away from the fire, raising his hands slightly. "Name's Jack Calloway. Most folks call me Jack. I run the Broken Arrow Ranch. If you don't want to come with me, I understand. But I can leave you some extra blankets at least." Something in his voice, a note of genuine concern without pity, made Eliza step forward, keeping the children behind her. "I'm Eliza Whitaker," she said, lifting her chin. "These are my charges. We're heading north looking for work." The man named Jack studied her for a long moment, then nodded as though something had been decided. "There's work at my place if you're willing, and shelter for the young ones. No strings attached, and you can leave any time you choose. Why would you help us? You don't even know us." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes, though his expression remained serious. "My ma used to say a person's measure isn't what they do when the path is clear, but what they do at the crossroads. Looks to me like you're at a crossroads, Miss Whitaker." Eliza glanced back at the children, tired, frightened, but trusting her to make the right decision. The night was growing colder and they had nowhere else to go. "We accept your offer, Mr. Calloway," she said finally, "but I want your word that the children will be safe." "You have it," he replied without hesitation, "and it's just Jack. Mr. Calloway was my father." Within minutes, he had helped them gather their few possessions. He lifted the twins onto his horse, then Thomas, and finally Sarah, who stared at him with solemn eyes before allowing herself to be settled in front of Mary. "It's about 3 miles," he said, taking the horse's reins and falling into step beside Eliza. "Not too far, but I'm guessing those little ones have done enough walking today." Eliza nodded, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what we would have done." Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "Sometimes the good Lord puts people in our path when we need them most," he said simply. "My ranch isn't much to look at, but there's room enough for all of you." As they walked beneath the star-filled Montana sky, Eliza allowed herself a small flicker of hope. One night of safety was more than they'd had before. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this was enough. Jack Calloway had built the Broken Arrow Ranch with his own 2 hands over the past 7 years. The main house was solid pine construction, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. A barn and corral stood nearby, along with a bunkhouse for the handful of cowboys he employed during the busier seasons. Now, in late autumn, most of his hands had moved on to winter work elsewhere, leaving just himself and old Pete, who'd been cooking for ranch outfits since before Jack was born. The quiet suited Jack fine. At 32, he'd seen enough of the world to know what he wanted, and what he wanted was his own piece of land, his own herd, and the freedom to live by his own code. What he hadn't expected was to find himself leading a woman and 4 orphaned children up to his front door well after dark. "Pete," he called as they approached the house. A lamp glowed in the window and smoke curled from the stone chimney. Got some company. The door swung open, revealing a grizzled man with a white beard and a flower-covered apron. Saints preserve us, Pete muttered, eyeing the bedraggled group. Where'd you find these strays, boss? Down by Cottonwood Bend, Jack replied, helping the children down from his horse. Miss Whitaker and her charges need shelter for the night. Pete's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his balding pate, but he just nodded and stepped back. Well, come in then. Got a stew keeping warm and biscuits in the warming oven. Eliza hesitated at the threshold, and Jack could read the wariness in her posture. She was bone-tired and clearly desperate, but still protecting those children like a mother bear with her cubs. It's all right, he said quietly. No one here will harm you or the little ones. She met his eyes then, and for the first time he truly saw her face in the lamplight, oval shaped with a stubborn chin, clear hazel eyes, and a dusting of freckles across her nose. Pretty, in a real way that had nothing to do with artifice. She was dressed simply in a brown traveling dress that had seen better days, her honey-colored hair escaping its pins to curl around her face. Thank you, she said, guiding the children inside. The main room of the ranch house was dominated by a large stone fireplace, with comfortable, if somewhat worn, furniture arranged around it. A long table stood nearby, and Pete was already setting out bowls and spoons. Wash up at the basin there, he instructed, nodding toward a corner where a washstand held a pitcher and bowl. Can't have dirty hands at my table. The children looked to Eliza, who nodded encouragingly. Let me help you, Sarah, she said, leading the smallest child to the washstand. Jack hung his hat and duster on pegs by the door, then rolled up his sleeves to take his turn at the basin. As he washed, he observed the little family surreptitiously. The children were thin but not starved, their clothes worn but clean. Miss Whitaker herself looked exhausted but determined, helping each child in turn before quickly washing her own hands and face. Got 2 spare bedrooms upstairs, Pete announced as he ladled stew into bowls. One for the miss and the little girl, another for the boys. The other young miss can have my room. I'll bunk with the boss. Jack nodded agreement, though he hadn't discussed sleeping arrangements with Pete. The old cook had simply assumed they'd be staying, and Jack saw no reason to contradict him. Not with the temperature dropping and a hint of snow in the air, Eliza looked up sharply. We don't mean to impose, just for tonight. Weather's turning, Jack interrupted mildly. Snow coming in, you'd be welcome to stay until it passes. The twins exchanged excited glances at the mention of snow, while Thomas tried to maintain a solemn expression that made him look older than his years. Little Sarah was already half asleep over her bowl of stew. Eat up, Pete encouraged, setting a plate of biscuits on the table. Growing young uns need their victuals. As they ate, Jack learned the children's names and ages. Thomas was indeed the oldest at 10, Mary and Matthew were 8-year-old twins, and little Sarah had just turned 5. Their parents had died of influenza the previous spring, and Miss Whitaker, who'd been a friend of their mother's, had taken them in rather than see them separated. Town didn't much care for my arrangement, she said carefully, clearly editing her story for the children's ears. We decided to seek opportunities elsewhere. Jack nodded, reading between the lines. He'd seen how frontier towns could turn on their own when conventions were challenged. A single woman taking in 4 orphans would raise eyebrows anywhere, but especially in a place like Redemption Creek, which prided itself on its respectable reputation. Well, there's plenty of opportunity at Broken Arrow, he said. Pete's been complaining he needs help with the cooking and mending, and I could use an extra hand with the horses come spring. Eliza set down her spoon, studying him with those perceptive hazel eyes. That's very generous, Mr. Calloway. Jack, he corrected gently. Jack, she acknowledged with a slight nod, but we can't accept charity. If we stay, I'll need to earn our keep. Ain't charity if you're working, Pete interjected, refilling Thomas's bowl without being asked. Boy here looks strong enough to help with chores, too. Thomas sat up straighter. I can work hard, sir. I'm good with animals. A smile tugged at the corner of Jack's mouth. I believe you are, Thomas. We'll find plenty for everyone to do. He turned back to Eliza. Just until the weather clears, if that's what you want, then you can decide your next move. Something in her expression softened slightly. Until the weather clears, she agreed. After the meal, Pete showed them to their rooms upstairs. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with 4 bedrooms on the second floor. Jack's room was at one end of the hallway, with Pete's across from it. The 2 spare rooms were at the opposite end, separated by a small sitting area with a window that overlooked the front of the property. Bathrooms downstairs, off the kitchen, Pete explained. Got a pump inside and a proper bathtub. Boss here's particular about modern comforts. Jack felt his ears warm slightly at Eliza's surprised glance. Read somewhere that indoor plumbing's the future, he said with a shrug. Seemed worth the trouble. It certainly is, she replied, a genuine smile briefly transforming her tired face. Once the children were settled, the boys in one room, Eliza and Sarah in another, and Mary in Pete's room, Jack retreated to the kitchen with Pete to give them privacy. Well, you've done it now, Pete muttered, pouring them each a cup of coffee. Done what? Brought home a ready-made family, the old cook said, a twinkle in his roomy eyes. Been telling you for years you needed to find yourself a wife and fill this big house with young'uns. Jack nearly choked on his coffee. It's temporary, Pete. They needed help, that's all. Uh-huh. Pete didn't look convinced. Pretty young woman with a heart big enough to take in 4 orphans, and you just happened to be riding by their campfire. I was checking the south fences, Jack protested. And she's not looking for a husband. She's looking for work and a safe place for those children. Pete stroked his beard thoughtfully. Maybe so, but seems to me the good Lord works in mysterious ways sometimes. Jack sighed, knowing from experience that arguing with Pete when he got a notion in his head was futile. Just make sure they're comfortable while they're here, and don't go filling their heads with nonsense about staying permanently. Wouldn't dream of it, boss, Pete said innocently, then grinned. Though I will say, been a long time since this house had the sound of children in it. Feels right somehow. Later, as Jack settled onto the narrow cot in the corner of his room, having given Pete his bed, he found himself thinking about Eliza Whitaker and her makeshift family. There was a strength in her that he admired, the kind that didn't bend even when the whole world seemed set against you. He'd seen how fiercely she protected those children, how careful she was with their dignity. The snow began falling just before midnight, big flakes drifting past his window in the pale moonlight. By morning, the world would be transformed, and their unexpected guests would be snowbound at Broken Arrow, at least for a few days. Jack wasn't entirely sure why that thought made him smile as he drifted off to sleep. Eliza woke to the unfamiliar sensation of a real bed beneath her and warm blankets tucked around her. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then Sarah stirred beside her, and everything came flooding back. The eviction, the desperate trek north, the cowboy who'd offered them shelter. Pale light filtered through the curtains, and when she carefully rose to look outside, her breath caught. The world had transformed overnight into a wonderland of white. Snow blanketed the yard, the barn, the corral fences at least 6 inches deep, with more still falling in gentle swirls. "Oh my," she whispered. "Is it morning, Miss Eliza?" Sarah asked sleepily, sitting up in bed, her blonde curls tousled. "Yes, sweetheart, and look, it snowed during the night." Sarah scrambled to join her at the window, her eyes widening. "It's so pretty. Can we go outside and play in it?" "Perhaps later," Eliza said, helping the little girl dress. "First, we should see if the others are awake and if we can help with breakfast." They found Mary already downstairs, her dark braids neatly plaited, helping Pete set the table. The old cook greeted them with a cheerful nod. "Morning, ladies. Boys are out helping the boss with morning chores. Should be back any minute. Coffee's hot if you want some, Miss Whitaker." "Thank you, Pete, and please call me Eliza." She accepted the steaming mug gratefully. "Is there something I can help with?" "You could mind these biscuits while I finish the gravy," he suggested, pointing to the oven. "Mary here's already got a knack for frying bacon." Mary beamed at the compliment, carefully turning strips of bacon in a cast iron skillet. Eliza checked the biscuits, finding them golden brown and perfect. As she removed them from the oven, the back door burst open, admitting a flurry of snow, two excited boys, and Jack Calloway, all three stamping their boots on the mat. "Miss Eliza, we helped feed the horses and collect eggs," Matthew announced proudly, his cheeks red from the cold. Thomas held up a basket containing at least a dozen eggs. "The hens didn't mind the snow at all. Mr. Jack says they're special cold weather chickens." Jack hung his coat on a peg, running a hand through his dark hair, which was dusted with melting snowflakes. In the morning light, Eliza could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jawline darkened by stubble. His eyes were a deep blue that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, as he was doing now at the boys' enthusiasm. "They did a fine job," he told Eliza. "Thomas has a way with animals. That old rooster doesn't let just anyone near his hens." Eliza felt a surge of pride for Thomas, who stood a little taller at the praise. "Thank you for including them," Jack shrugged. "Ranch is no place for idle hands. Everyone works, everyone eats. That's the rule." "A rule I heartily approve of," she replied, setting the biscuits on the table. "Speaking of which, breakfast is ready." They gathered around the table, and Eliza was struck by how natural it felt, as though they'd been sharing meals like this for years, instead of just since last night. The children chattered excitedly about the snow and the animals they'd seen, while Pete kept everyone's plates full, and Jack occasionally interjected with a comment or question that showed he was genuinely listening. After breakfast, Jack pushed back from the table. "Snow's too deep for much outside work today. Thought I might cut a fresh Christmas tree for the house. Anyone want to help?" Four children's hands shot up immediately, and Eliza couldn't help smiling at their excitement. "Christmas is coming soon, isn't it?" Mary said. "We haven't had a tree since," she stopped abruptly, her expression faltering. "Since before," Thomas finished quietly. A moment of silence fell over the table, and Eliza reached out to squeeze Mary's hand. "Then it's high time we had one, don't you think?" Jack nodded, his expression gentle. "I know just the spot where the perfect tree is waiting. We'll need to bundle up warm, though." "I'm afraid the children don't have proper winter clothes," Eliza admitted. "We left in something of a hurry." "Got plenty of spare coats and scarves in the mudroom," Pete offered. "Might be big on the young ones, but we can roll up the sleeves." Soon they were all bundled up in an assortment of oversized coats, scarves, and mittens. Jack had found a small sled in the barn, which he insisted the younger children could ride on if they got tired. With Pete staying behind to rest his old bones, as he put it, the unusual party set off toward a stand of pine trees visible on a nearby hill. The snow was still falling lightly, and the children were beside themselves with delight, stopping every few steps to catch snowflakes on their tongues or make small snowballs. Even Thomas, who often tried to maintain a serious demeanor, was soon laughing as Matthew ambushed him with a handful of snow down the back of his collar. Jack walked beside Eliza, pulling the sled with Sarah perched on it like a queen. "They're good kids," he observed. "You've done well with them." "Their parents did the hard part," Eliza replied. "I'm just trying to keep their family together." "That's no small thing," he said, his voice serious. "Most folks would have let the orphanage or separate homes take them." Eliza shook her head. "I promised their mother. Charlotte and I grew up together in St. Louis. When she married Edward and moved west, I eventually followed. I was working in the millinery shop when the influenza came through town." She glanced at the children, making sure they were out of earshot. "Charlotte made me promise they'd stay together no matter what. It was the last thing she asked of me." Jack was silent for a moment, navigating the sled around a fallen log. Redemption Creek didn't approve. At first, they tolerated it. I think they expected me to give up when it got difficult. When I didn't, she sighed. "Well, suddenly I was setting a bad example and living in an improper arrangement. Mrs. Hargrove fired me from the shop and no one else would hire me. The boarding house asked us to leave. We managed in the abandoned church for a while, but then Mr. Thatcher decided to sell the property." "And he threw you out," Jack concluded, his jaw tightening. "With a shotgun," Eliza confirmed. Though he was firing into the air, Jack's expression darkened. "Man like that deserves," he stopped himself, glancing at Sarah on the sled. Well, he doesn't deserve to prosper, let's just say that. Ahead of them, the twins had reached the pine trees and were running between them, debating which would make the best Christmas tree. Thomas had appointed himself their guide, pointing out which trees were too tall or too sparse. "What about you?" Eliza asked after a moment. "A successful rancher like yourself, all alone out here except for Pete." Jack's smile returned, though it seemed tinged with something like wistfulness. "Wasn't always alone. My parents and younger sister came west with me from Pennsylvania in '68. We started Broken Arrow together." His eyes scanned the snow-covered landscape. "Lost Pa to a heart attack the second year. Ma and my sister Abigail kept the house while I worked the ranch. Then in '72, a fever took them both within a week of each other." "I'm so sorry," Eliza said softly. He nodded acknowledgement. "Pete's been with me since the beginning. Ornery old cuss, but loyal to the bone. Hire a few hands during the busy seasons, but mostly it's just been the two of us." He glanced down at Sarah, who was making snow angels off the side of the trail. "House has been too quiet for too long." Before Eliza could respond, Thomas came running back. "We found it, Miss Eliza, the perfect tree. Come see." The perfect tree turned out to be a beautiful blue spruce, about 6 feet tall with symmetrical branches and a straight trunk. The children danced around it while Jack assessed it with a critical eye. "Fine choice," he declared, pulling an axe from the carrier on the sled. "Stand back now and I'll have it down in no time." The children watched in fascination as Jack made short work of cutting down the tree. With a final crack, it toppled gently into the snow, and the children cheered. Jack secured it to the sled, and they began the journey back to the ranch, the children taking turns walking alongside their prize or riding on the portion of the sled not occupied by the tree. Eliza found herself walking beside Jack again, occasionally steadying the tree when the sled hit a bump. "Thank you for this," she said. "The children needed something to celebrate." "So did you," he replied simply. She glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "Perhaps I did." Back at the ranch, Pete had prepared hot chocolate for everyone, and the main room buzzed with activity as Jack set up the tree in a stand he'd fashioned years ago. The children helped unpack a box of ornaments that had belonged to Jack's mother and sister, delicate glass balls, carved wooden figures, and paper stars carefully preserved in tissue paper. "These were Abigail's favorite," Jack told Mary, showing her a set of tiny angels made from clothespins and lace. "She made them herself when she was about your age." Mary handled them reverently. "They're beautiful. May I hang them on the tree?" "Of course." "I think Abigail would like that very much." As the day progressed, Eliza found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. The children were safe and happy, decorating the tree and helping Pete prepare a stew for dinner. Jack moved around his home with an easy confidence, finding tasks that made each child feel useful and important. By evening, the tree was decorated, the house was filled with delicious smells, and the snow was still falling steadily outside. After dinner, they gathered in the main room, where Jack started a fire in the hearth. Pete produced a battered edition of A Christmas Carol and began reading aloud, his gravelly voice surprisingly expressive as he acted out the different characters. The children were enthralled, and Eliza found herself watching Jack more than listening to the story. He sat in a large armchair, little Sarah having claimed a spot on his lap about halfway through the first chapter. His big hands were gentle, as he occasionally smoothed her hair or adjusted the blanket around her small shoulders. There was something about the way he interacted with the children, never talking down to them, always listening to their opinions, that touched her deeply. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, meeting her eyes across the room. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, an understanding that made her heart beat a little faster. Jack Calloway was unlike any man she'd ever known, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. When Pete finished the chapter, Sarah was fast asleep in Jack's arms and the twins were yawning widely. "Time for bed, I think," Eliza announced, rising from her seat. "But we want to hear what happens to Scrooge," Matthew protested sleepily. "Tomorrow," Pete promised. "One chapter each night until Christmas. That's how my ma used to do it." Jack carefully transferred Sarah to Eliza's arms. "Need help getting them settled?" he asked quietly. "We'll manage," she replied, though the offer warmed her. "Thank you for today, Jack. It was perfect." His smile reached all the way to his eyes. "Just the beginning, Eliza, just the beginning." As Eliza climbed the stairs with Sarah in her arms, the other children trailing behind, she couldn't help wondering what he'd meant by that, and why the thought made her feel so hopeful. The snow continued for 3 days, blanketing the ranch in pristine white and effectively cutting them off from the nearest town. During that time, a routine developed naturally. The boys would help Jack with morning chores, while Eliza, Mary, and Sarah assisted Pete in the kitchen. After breakfast, there were always tasks to keep everyone busy: mending that needed doing, supplies to organize, preparations for Christmas to make. In the afternoons, Jack often took the children outside for sledding or to build snow sculptures. Eliza would watch from the porch or through the windows as he patiently taught Thomas to carve a whistle from a piece of pine, or showed the twins how to make the perfect snowball, or pulled Sarah on the sled until her giggles echoed across the snow-covered yard. Evenings were spent around the fire, with Pete reading another chapter of A Christmas Carol, followed by Jack sharing stories about the early days of the ranch, or Eliza teaching the children songs she remembered from her own childhood. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth while the wind whispered around the eaves. On the 4th day, the snow stopped and the sun emerged, transforming the landscape into a glittering wonderland. Jack announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into town for supplies. "The main road should be passable now," he said, buttering a biscuit. "Anything special you folks need while I'm there?" The children immediately began listing Christmas wishes: candy sticks, a new pencil, a picture book, until Eliza gently shushed them. "We don't expect you to buy presents, Jack," she said firmly. "You've done more than enough already." He smiled, that crooked smile that had begun to make her heart flutter. "Christmas is coming, Eliza. Let me do this." She wanted to protest further, but there was something in his expression that stopped her. Instead, she nodded. "Perhaps some fabric, then." "I thought I might make the children each something new to wear for Christmas." "Fabric it is," he agreed. "And whatever else Santa might suggest while I'm in town." After he'd left, Eliza helped Pete with the washing up, her mind unsettled. The snowbound days at Broken Arrow had been like a dream: peaceful, joyful, secure. But the clearing weather was a reminder that this arrangement was temporary. Soon they would need to move on, find a more permanent situation. "Penny for your thoughts," Pete said, drying a plate with meticulous care. Eliza sighed. "Just wondering what comes next, for the children and me." Pete gave her a sideways glance. "Seems to me you've already found what comes next." "Pete, we can't impose on Jack's hospitality indefinitely. He's been incredibly kind, but kind nothing," Pete interrupted. "You think he brings home every stray he finds? In 7 years, you're the first folks he's ever invited to stay." He set down the dish towel. "Look around you, Eliza. This house was built for a family. Jack's been rattling around in it alone too long." "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Pete said innocently. "Just stating facts. Boss needs help running this place. Children need a home. You need somewhere to belong. Sometimes the good Lord's plan is simpler than we make it out to be." Before Eliza could respond, Sarah came running into the kitchen, her eyes wide. "Miss Eliza, Thomas and Matthew found kittens in the barn. Can we keep one, please?" With a knowing smile, Pete returned to his dishes while Eliza allowed herself to be pulled toward the barn, Sarah chattering excitedly about the tiny balls of fur and how one of them had orange spots, just like Freckles. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Thomas and Matthew were kneeling beside a stall where a tabby cat was nursing 5 squirming kittens. "Look, Miss Eliza," Thomas whispered. "Aren't they wonderful?" Eliza knelt beside the boys, with Sarah peering over her shoulder. The mother cat regarded them warily but didn't move from her babies. "They are beautiful," Eliza agreed, "but they need to stay with their mother until they're older." "Mr. Jack said we could each pick one to be ours when they're ready," Matthew said. "Even you and Mary, did he now?" Eliza raised an eyebrow. When did he say this? This morning, when we were doing chores, Thomas replied. He said every good barn needs cats to keep the mice away, but these kittens are special because they were born right after we arrived. He said it was a good omen. Eliza stood slowly, brushing hay from her skirt. Jack was making promises to the children, promises about the future, about staying. It was dangerous territory. The children were already becoming attached to this place, to Pete, to Jack, and if she was honest with herself, so was she. We'll see what Mr. Jack says when he returns, she said carefully. For now, let's leave the mother cat in peace. As they walked back to the house, Thomas fell into step beside her. Miss Eliza, he said hesitantly, are we going to stay here, at Broken Arrow? The question she'd been dreading. Eliza stopped, kneeling to face the boy eye to eye. Thomas, Mr. Jack has been very generous allowing us to stay during the snowstorm, but this is his home, not ours. Thomas's face fell, but he likes having us here, he told me so. He said the house feels right with children in it again. Did he? Eliza felt a flutter in her chest. Thomas nodded earnestly. And he likes you too, I can tell. Oh, and how can you tell that? Eliza asked, trying to keep her tone light. Because he looks at you the way Pa used to look at Ma, Thomas said simply. Like you're something special he wants to keep safe forever. Eliza was saved from responding by Mary's arrival, announcing that Pete needed help with lunch. But Thomas's words stayed with her throughout the afternoon, mixing with Pete's observations and her own confused feelings. Jack returned just before sunset, his horse laden with supplies and packages. The children rushed to greet him, peppering him with questions about town and what was in all those mysterious bundles. He laughed, unloading everything into Pete's waiting arms with strict instructions that certain items were to be hidden away until Christmas. Town's buzzing about you folks, he told Eliza later, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the snow-covered mountains. The children were inside, helping Pete prepare dinner and pestering him about the hidden packages. About us? Eliza asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Jack nodded, his expression somber. Word got around that a woman and 4 orphans were turned out of Redemption Creek. Seems Bernard Thatcher's been telling anyone who'll listen that he did the town a service, running off that troublemaking woman and her brats. Eliza's cheeks burned with anger and embarrassment. That man is despicable. That he is, Jack agreed, but not everyone shares his opinion. The Reverend's wife was particularly distressed to hear how you'd been treated, said if she'd known, she would have offered the parsonage guest room. That's kind of her to say now, Eliza replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Jack studied her profile in the fading light. People are complicated, Eliza. They get caught up in what others think in appearing respectable. Sometimes it takes a shock to make them examine their consciences. And my being run out of town with 4 children was that shock, for some, he said. The storekeeper's wife asked me to give you this. He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. Said it was money the Ladies' Aid Society collected for the children, for Christmas. Eliza took the envelope with trembling fingers. I don't understand. I think they're ashamed, Jack said simply. As they should be. She opened the envelope to find $15 and a note expressing the Redemption Creek Ladies' Aid Society's sincere regrets for any hardship and their prayers for a blessed Christmas. It was signed by 12 women, several of whom had refused to speak to Eliza in her final weeks in town. I don't know whether to be grateful or angry, she admitted, folding the note. Be both, Jack suggested with a smile. Use their money to buy the children something nice and then be angry on principle. A laugh escaped her, surprising them both. That's very practical advice, Mr. Calloway. I'm a practical man, Miss Whitaker. His eyes held hers, suddenly serious. Which is why I'd like to make you a proposition. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. A proposition, he shifted in his chair, facing her more directly. Broken Arrow needs a woman's touch, has for years. The children need a home where they can stay together. You need a place where you're respected and valued. He took a deep breath. Stay, Eliza, not just for Christmas, but after. Make this your home. She stared at him, scarcely breathing. Jack, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he added quickly. You'd have your own room, your own independence. The children would have stability, education. I've already spoken to Mrs. Pendleton in town. She was a school teacher back east. She'd be willing to come out 3 times a week to tutor them. You've thought this through, Eliza said softly. Jack nodded. I have. Pete's not getting any younger and I could use help running the household. You've already proven you're capable and hardworking. The children are settling in well. It makes sense, Eliza. A practical arrangement, she murmured. Something flickered in his eyes. For now. But I won't pretend I don't hope for more eventually, when you're ready, if you're ever ready. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. The town would talk. They'd say the same things they said in Redemption Creek. Let them, Jack said firmly. I don't answer to gossips and hypocrites. Never have, never will. He reached out, hesitantly covering her hand with his. I'm asking you to trust me, Eliza, to give Broken Arrow a chance to be the home you and those children deserve. Eliza looked at their hands, his large and calloused, her smaller but no less work-worn. There was strength in that touch and a promise. I need to think, she said finally, and to talk with the children. This affects them too. Jack squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Of course, take all the time you need. He stood, offering her his arm to escort her inside. But know this, Eliza Whitaker, you belong here, all of you. I knew at the moment I saw you standing so brave and defiant at that campfire. That night after the children were asleep, Eliza sat by the window in her room, watching the moonlight on the snow and turning Jack's proposition over in her mind. Stay at Broken Arrow, make it their home. Work alongside Jack, watching the children grow up safe and loved in this beautiful place. And perhaps, eventually, something more between them. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Could she trust this man she'd known for less than a week? Could she risk the children's hearts and her own on this chance at happiness? Or was she being foolish, allowing the magic of Christmas and the beauty of Broken Arrow to cloud her judgment? She fell asleep still wrestling with these questions, her dreams filled with images of children laughing in summer meadows, a tall figure walking beside her, and a house filled with love and light. Christmas Eve arrived in a blaze of sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. The children were nearly bursting with excitement, having spent the previous days making secret gifts for each other and for the adults who had taken them in. Eliza had still not given Jack an answer to his proposition, though she'd noticed him watching her with patient hope in his eyes. She'd used the money from the Ladies' Aid Society to purchase small gifts in town: a jackknife for Thomas, hair ribbons for Mary, a wooden horse for Matthew, and a rag doll for Sarah. With Pete's help, she'd also managed to sew new clothes for each child to be worn for Christmas dinner. Jack had been mysterious about his own preparations, disappearing into the barn for hours at a time and bringing in fresh pine boughs to decorate the mantelpiece and stair railings. The house smelled of evergreens, cinnamon, and the apple pies Pete had baked that morning. As twilight approached, Jack suggested they all attend the Christmas Eve service in town. The roads are clear enough for the wagon, he said. Thought it might be nice to celebrate properly. Eliza hesitated, thinking of the reception they might receive in a town where rumors about them had surely spread. But the children were eager, especially when Jack mentioned there would be carol singing and candles. Are you sure it's wise? She asked Jack privately while the children were getting ready. He met her gaze steadily. I'm sure it's right. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Eliza, and neither do those children. It's time everyone understood that. His confidence bolstered her, and soon they were all bundled into the wagon, with heated bricks wrapped in blankets at their feet to ward off the cold. Jack had brought extra buffalo robes to tuck around them, and with Pete driving and Jack riding alongside on his horse, they set off toward town. Silver Creek was smaller than Redemption Creek, but more prosperous-looking, with neat wooden buildings lining a wide main street. The church stood at the north end of town, its white steeple rising gracefully against the darkening sky. Lanterns had been placed along the path to the door, and the windows glowed with warm light. As they approached, Eliza's anxiety returned. What if they weren't welcome? What if the children faced rejection or cruel whispers? Jack seemed to sense her concern. He dismounted and came to help her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "It's going to be fine," he said quietly. "I promise." The children climbed down eagerly, their eyes wide at the sight of the decorated church. Thomas took Sarah's hand automatically while the twins stayed close to Pete, who was resplendent in a clean shirt and his best vest. As they walked toward the church, the door opened and a woman in a green dress stepped out. "Jack Calloway, right on time," she called. "And these must be your guests we've heard so much about." Jack guided Eliza forward. "Mrs. Pendleton, may I present Miss Eliza Whitaker and her charges Thomas, Mary, Matthew, and Sarah. Folks, this is Mrs. Abigail Pendleton, the finest teacher in 3 counties, Mrs. Pendleton, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair, smiled warmly. "I'm delighted to meet you all. Jack has told me so much about you." She bent slightly to address the children. "We have a special place saved in the front pew for children tonight so you can see everything. Would you like that?" The children looked to Eliza for permission, and when she nodded, they followed Mrs. Pendleton into the church, with Pete trailing behind, grumbling good-naturedly about his old bones not being used to church pews anymore. Jack offered Eliza his arm. "Shall we?" She placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, drawing strength from his solid presence. "What exactly have you told people about us, Jack?" His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Only the truth. That you're the bravest woman I've ever met, and those children are the luckiest orphans in Montana to have you fighting for them." The service was beautiful. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and a nativity scene had been set up near the altar. The Reverend, a young man with an earnest manner, spoke about the Holy Family seeking shelter in Bethlehem, and how the greatest gift of Christmas was opening one's heart and home to those in need. Eliza couldn't help feeling the message was meant for them, especially when the Reverend's gaze lingered on their pew. But there was no judgment in his eyes, only compassion and welcome. After the sermon, the congregation sang carols while candles were lit, the light spreading from person to person until the church glowed with hundreds of tiny flames. Sarah, seated on Jack's lap, was mesmerized by the dancing lights, while the other children sang with enthusiasm, if not always perfect pitch. When the service ended, Eliza expected they would return directly to the ranch. Instead, they found themselves being introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Silver Creek. Mrs. Pendleton's husband, the town doctor, shook Eliza's hand warmly and told her he'd be happy to check on the children's health whenever needed. The storekeeper and his wife invited them to Christmas dinner the following week. Even the mayor stopped to welcome them to the community. "Everyone's so friendly," Eliza murmured to Jack as they finally made their way back to the wagon. "Good people," Jack replied. "Not perfect, but decent. They understand what matters." The ride back to the ranch was filled with the children's excited chatter about the service, the candles, and the people they'd met. Even Thomas, usually so reserved, was animated as he described the church organ to Pete, who had dozed off during the sermon and missed its grandest moments. Back at the ranch, the children were allowed to hang their stockings by the fireplace, actual stockings that Pete had mysteriously produced, each embroidered with a child's initial. Jack read the nativity story from his mother's Bible, and Eliza led them in a final carol before sending them off to bed with warnings that Santa wouldn't come until they were asleep. "But how will Santa find us here?" Sarah asked as Eliza tucked her in. "We're not at home." Eliza smoothed the little girl's curls. "Santa always knows where good children are, sweetheart, and you've been very good." "I like it here," Sarah whispered, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "Can we stay forever, Miss Eliza?" The question caught at Eliza's heart. "We'll see, little one." "Now sleep tight." When she returned downstairs, she found Jack sitting alone by the fire, Pete having retired to his room with a wink and a murmured comment about helping Santa. Jack looked up as she entered, his face illuminated by the firelight. "Children settled?" he asked. Eliza nodded, taking the chair opposite his. They're exhausted but happy. Sarah asked if we could stay forever. Smart girl, Jack said with a smile. What did you tell her? That we'll see. Eliza watched the flames dance for a moment. The people in town were very welcoming. They're good neighbors, the kind who help when needed and mind their own business otherwise. He leaned forward, his eyes serious. The kind of community those children deserve to grow up in. Eliza took a deep breath. Jack, about your proposition. You don't have to decide tonight, he said quickly. I do, she countered. Because those children are hanging stockings and believing in Santa, and tomorrow they'll wake up expecting magic. I need to know if this is real or if we're just pretending for Christmas. Jack's expression softened. It's real, Eliza. Everything I've offered is real, a home for all of you for as long as you want it. A chance for us to see if what I'm feeling, what I hope you're feeling too, can grow into something lasting. And if it doesn't, she asked quietly, if we try and fail? Then you'll still have a home here and those children will still have stability and education. I gave my word and I don't break it. He reached across the space between them, offering his hand. But I don't think we'll fail, Eliza. I think we found each other because we were meant to. Eliza looked at his outstretched hand, thinking of all they'd been through, the desperate flight from Redemption Creek, the chance meeting at the campfire, the snow that had kept them together long enough to begin knowing each other. Perhaps it wasn't chance at all, but providence. Yes, she said finally, placing her hand in his. We'll stay. We'll make Broken Arrow our home. The joy that blazed across Jack's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms in one fluid motion. You won't regret it, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. I'll spend every day making sure of that. Eliza looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were, his arms strong around her waist, his eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper, warmer. Jack, she whispered, not quite a question, not quite permission. He understood nonetheless, lowering his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Eliza rose on tiptoe instead, meeting him halfway as his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. It was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as she slid her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the first night you were here, he admitted. Eliza smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. I may have thought about it once or twice myself. He chuckled, pressing another quick kiss to her lips before reluctantly stepping back. We should probably help Santa finish his preparations. Morning will come early with 4 excited children in the house. Yes, we should, she agreed, though she was reluctant to leave the circle of his arms. Thank you, Jack, for everything, he smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Merry Christmas, Eliza. Merry Christmas, Jack. Together, they retrieved the hidden packages and filled the stockings, working in companionable silence broken occasionally by whispered consultations or soft laughter. As they placed the last gifts under the tree, Jack caught her hand again. One more thing, he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. This is for you. I'd like you to open it now if that's all right. Curious, Eliza unwrapped the package to find a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Jack, it's beautiful, she breathed. Open it, he encouraged. She carefully opened the locket to find a tiny picture on one side, a perfect miniature of the Broken Arrow ranch house. The other side was empty. I thought perhaps a family portrait when we have one made, Jack explained. I wanted you to have something to remind you that you have a home now, that you belong here. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes as she handed him the locket. Will you put it on me? Jack's fingers were surprisingly deft as he fastened the chain around her neck. The locket rested just below her collarbone, warm against her skin. Perfect, he murmured, his hands lingering on her shoulders. Eliza turned to face him, touching the locket. I don't have anything for you, she said regretfully. Jack's smile was tender as he took her hand and placed it over his heart. You've given me everything I could want, Eliza, a family, a future, hope. This time, it was Eliza who initiated the kiss, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. pouring all her gratitude and newfound hope into the gesture. Jack's arms tightened around her, and for a long moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, the firelight and the promise of Christmas morning. A small noise from the stairs finally broke them apart. They turned to see Sarah standing there in her nightgown, eyes wide. "I heard Santa," she whispered loudly. Jack recovered first, swooping across the room to scoop her up. "Santa's already been and gone, little miss," he said, his voice playfully stern, and he left strict instructions that certain young ladies should be fast asleep. Sarah giggled as he carried her toward the stairs. I'm going." She peered over his shoulder at Eliza. "Miss Eliza, is that a new necklace? It's pretty." "Yes, it is," Eliza replied, touching the locket. "Mr. Jack gave it to me for Christmas." Sarah's smile was knowing beyond her years. "That's nice. He likes you a whole lot." Jack's ears reddened as he carried the little girl upstairs, and Eliza couldn't help laughing softly. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. When Jack returned, they spent a few more minutes adjusting presents and making sure everything was perfect for morning. As they finally prepared to retire for the night, Jack took her hand one last time. "Sweet dreams, Eliza," he said. "Tomorrow is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" she asked, though she thought she knew. His smile was full of promise. "Of forever." Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliant, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of excited children trying and failing to be quiet as they crept downstairs to see if Santa had come. Eliza, already awake, slipped on her robe and followed them down, pausing on the landing to take in the scene below. The four children stood in the doorway to the main room, transfixed by the sight of the decorated tree with presents piled beneath it and bulging stockings hanging from the mantel. Jack was already there, stoking the fire to life while Pete busied himself in the kitchen, the smells of coffee and cinnamon rolls wafting through the house. "Merry Christmas," Eliza called, descending the rest of the stairs. The children turned as one, their faces alight with excitement. "Miss Eliza, look, Santa found us," Matthew exclaimed. "He brought so many presents," Mary added, her eyes wide. "Can we open them now, please?" Sarah begged, hopping from one foot to the other. Jack straightened from the fireplace, catching Eliza's eye with a warm smile. "I think stockings first while Pete finishes breakfast, then presents after we eat." "How does that sound?" The children readily agreed, rushing to claim their stockings. Each contained an orange, candy sticks, nuts, and small toys, a set of Jacks for Mary, marbles for the boys, and a tiny porcelain doll for Sarah. They exclaimed over each item as though it were treasure, and Eliza felt her heart swell with gratitude for Jack's thoughtfulness. Breakfast was a festive affair, with Pete's special cinnamon rolls and scrambled eggs with ham. The children could barely sit still, but they managed to eat everything on their plates, knowing presents awaited. Finally, it was time. They gathered around the tree, and Jack appointed Thomas as Santa's helper to distribute the gifts. There were the presents Eliza had purchased with the ladies' aid money, and others from Jack: a wooden train set for Matthew, a beautiful illustrated book of fairy tales for Mary, a real cowboy hat for Thomas, and a rocking horse for Sarah that Jack had carved himself. "It looks just like thunder," Sarah exclaimed, referring to Jack's own horse. She immediately set it rocking, her face alight with joy. The children had made gifts as well, drawings for everyone: a pinecone bird feeder that Matthew had constructed for Jack, and a somewhat lopsided pot holder that Mary had knitted for Eliza. Even old Pete was included, receiving hand-carved wooden spoons that Jack had helped Thomas make, and a wreath of pine cones and ribbons from the twins. As the last presents were opened and the children played with their new treasures, Jack slipped away briefly, returning with one final package, a large, flat rectangle wrapped in brown paper. "One more," he announced, handing it to Eliza. "This is for all of you." Curious, Eliza unwrapped it with the children gathered around her. It was a wooden sign, beautifully carved and painted. It read, "Broken Arrow Ranch, home of the Calloway family," and beneath that, in slightly smaller letters, "Jack, Eliza, Thomas, Mary, Matthew, and Sarah." Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she traced the letters with her fingertips. "Jack," I thought we might hang it by the main gate, he said, watching her reaction carefully, so everyone knows who belongs here. Thomas was the first to understand. You mean we're staying for good? Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving Eliza's face. If that's what you all want. Yes, the twins chorused immediately. Sarah climbed into Jack's lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. Does this mean you're going to be our new pa? She asked bluntly. Jack's ears reddened, but he didn't hesitate. I'd like that very much, Sarah. Someday, if Miss Eliza agrees. All eyes turned to Eliza, who was still staring at the sign, her vision blurring with tears. This man had opened not just his door to them, but his heart. He was offering them not charity or a temporary haven, but a real home, a family. Miss Eliza, Thomas prompted anxiously. Do you want to stay too? Eliza looked up, meeting Jack's gaze. The love she saw there, steady, patient, unwavering, gave her the courage to speak the truth in her heart. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it, to staying, to building a life here, to becoming a family. The children erupted in cheers while Pete, who had been watching from the doorway, wiped suspiciously at his eyes with his apron. Jack's smile was radiant as he reached for Eliza's hand, drawing her to sit beside him. Best Christmas gift I could have asked for, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. For all of us, she agreed, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the children excitedly discussing where the sign should hang and what they wanted to do first as official members of the Broken Arrow Ranch. The winter passed in a blur of happy days and peaceful nights. True to his word, Jack arranged for Mrs. Pendleton to visit 3 times a week to tutor the children. Eliza took over management of the household, working alongside Pete to keep everyone fed and comfortable. The boys learned ranching skills from Jack, while Mary discovered a talent for gardening, eagerly planning the spring vegetable plot. By the time the snow began to melt and the first crocuses peeked through the earth, it was as though they had always been there, their lives seamlessly woven into the fabric of Broken Arrow. Jack and Eliza's relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They worked side by side during the day and often sat up talking late into the evening after the children were asleep. Sometimes they rode together to check the pastures, Eliza discovering a love for horsemanship she hadn't known she possessed. Other times, they simply walked the property, planning improvements and dreaming of the future. The courtship was old-fashioned and proper, but no less passionate for its restraint. A brush of hands while passing the salt, a lingering glance across the dinner table, a stolen kiss in the barn when they thought no one was looking, each small gesture built toward something enduring. On the first truly warm day of spring, Jack suggested a picnic by the creek. The children ran ahead, eager to wade in the water and look for early wildflowers. Pete begged off, claiming his old bones preferred the rocking chair on the porch, though he packed them a generous lunch of fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. As they walked, Jack seemed unusually quiet, even nervous. Eliza wondered if something was wrong, but decided to wait for him to speak in his own time. They reached the picnic spot, a grassy clearing beside the creek where they had first made camp on that fateful night, and spread the blanket while the children immediately removed their shoes and socks to splash in the shallow water. "Be careful," Eliza called, "and stay where we can see you." Jack touched her arm gently. "They'll be fine. Thomas is watching the little ones." She nodded, settling onto the blanket. "You're right, I still worry though." "That's what makes you such a good mother to them," Jack said, sitting beside her. Eliza smiled at the word mother. She had come to think of the children that way as her own, though she had never officially adopted them. Perhaps it was time to speak with the judge in Silver Creek about making it legal. "Penny for your thoughts," Jack said, echoing Pete's familiar phrase. "I was thinking about the children," she admitted. "About making their place with us official in the eyes of the law," Jack nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking along similar lines." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that he kept concealed in his palm. "In fact, I've been thinking we should make a lot of things official." Eliza's heart began to race as Jack shifted to face her more directly. "Eliza Whitaker," he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes, These past months have been the happiest of my life. You and the children have brought joy and purpose back to Broken Arrow back to me. I know it hasn't been long, but I'm certain of what I feel." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it." As my wife, though she had begun to hope for this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Jack, I love you, Eliza," he said simply. "I love the children as if they were my own. I want to build a life with all of you, a real family, bound by law and love. Will you marry me?" Eliza looked at the man before her, strong, gentle, steadfast Jack Calloway, who had opened his door to strangers in need and his heart to the possibility of love again. She thought of the children, flourishing under his care and guidance. She thought of the home they were creating together at Broken Arrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jack, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. Jack cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, a kiss of promise and passion and joy. A splash and giggles from the creek reminded them they weren't alone. They broke apart to find all 4 children watching them, expressions ranging from Sarah's delighted grin to Thomas's knowing smile. "Did she say yes?" Mary called. Jack laughed. "She did." The children abandoned the creek, rushing toward them with wet feet and excited questions. "When will the wedding be? Will they have cake? Can they have new clothes for the occasion?" As Jack fielded their questions with patient good humor, Eliza gazed at her newfound family, these 4 orphan children who had stolen her heart, and this good man who had made room for all of them in his life and home. She thought of how far they had come from that desperate night when Bernard Thatcher had evicted them from the abandoned church with a shotgun. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked quietly, noticing her pensive expression. "About beginnings and endings," she replied. "And how sometimes what seems like the end of everything is actually just the first step on a new path." He nodded, understanding in his eyes as he took her hand, the pearl ring glinting in the spring sunshine. "A path we'll walk together from now on." "Together," she agreed, as the children danced around them, already planning their roles in the wedding that would make them officially a family. The wedding took place on a perfect June day, with wildflowers decorating the small church in Silver Creek and sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. The entire town turned out for the occasion, along with a few surprised but pleased faces from Redemption Creek, including the Reverend and his wife, who had become friends after that Christmas Eve service. Eliza wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Pendleton had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to Jack's mother. The children were resplendent in new clothes, the boys in suits that matched Jack's, Mary in a pale blue dress with ribbons in her hair, and Sarah as flower girl in white with a crown of daisies. Judge Harrison performed the ceremony and afterward signed the adoption papers that legally made Thomas, Mary, Matthew, and Sarah the children of Jack and Eliza Calloway. There were tears and cheers and more cake than anyone could eat, thanks to Pete's determination to do things proper for once. By sunset, the newlyweds and their children had returned to Broken Arrow, where Jack carried Eliza across the threshold as the children scattered rose petals in their wake. Pete had prepared a special dinner and then tactfully retired to the bunkhouse, announcing he would be staying there for a few days to give the newlyweds some peace. After the children were tucked in excited but exhausted from the day's events, Jack and Eliza found themselves alone in the main room, the same space where they had first begun to know each other during those snowy days after Christmas. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway?" Jack asked, drawing her into his arms. "More than I ever thought possible," Eliza replied, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was thinking," Jack said after a moment, "that we might build an addition to the house. The children will need more room as they grow and perhaps—" He hesitated. Eliza looked up at him, her new husband, her partner in this miraculous journey. "Perhaps what, Jack?" His smile was tender as he placed a hand gently on her waist. "Perhaps we might be blessed with more children of our own someday, brothers and sisters for Thomas, Mary, Matthew, and Sarah." The thought warmed her heart. I'd like that very much. Later, as moonlight spilled through the windows of what was now their shared bedroom, Jack and Eliza consummated their marriage with all the tenderness and passion that had been building between them since that first night by the campfire. In each other's arms, they found the completion of a promise made months ago to build something lasting together, to create a family from the broken pieces life had handed them both. "I love you, Jack Calloway," Eliza whispered in the darkness. "And I love you, Eliza Calloway," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Forever. 2 years later, on another perfect June day, Jack stood on the porch of the expanded Broken Arrow ranch house, watching as his family gathered in the yard for a photographer from Silver Creek. Thomas, now 12 and sprouting like a weed, stood tall and proud in his Sunday best. The twins, Mary and Matthew, 10 and growing more independent by the day, flanked him on either side. 8-year-old Sarah, still the family princess, wore a dress Eliza had made specially for the occasion. And in Eliza's arms was 6-month-old Charlotte, named for the friend whose dying wish had set them all on this path. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for the locket around her mother's neck, the same locket Jack had given Eliza that first Christmas, now containing miniature portraits of all their children. "Everyone ready," the photographer called, ducking beneath the black cloth behind his camera. "Ready," Eliza confirmed, looking up at Jack with a smile that still made his heart skip a beat. As the family posed for their portrait, the first of many that would document their life together at Broken Arrow, Jack thought about the strange and wonderful twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A desperate woman and 4 orphan children, a lonely rancher with a too-empty house, a snowstorm that had given them time to begin knowing each other. And love, the kind of love that opened doors and hearts, that built families from strangers, that transformed endings into beginnings. "Hold still now," the photographer instructed. "This is a moment you'll want to remember." Jack slipped his arm around Eliza's waist, their newest daughter cradled between them, the older children gathered close, their faces alight with the security of knowing they were loved, they were wanted, they were home. "We will remember," Jack said softly, "every moment." And as the camera captured the image of the Calloway family of Broken Arrow Ranch, Jack knew with absolute certainty that opening his door to Eliza and the orphans that snowy night was the wisest, bravest, and most blessed decision he had ever made.